Good evening and welcome everyone to the 2024 annual Duldig Lecture on Sculpture. I'm Janine Kibblewhite, the President of Duldig Studio, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. On behalf of the Duldig Studio, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land we meet, share, work and create. We pay our respects to elders, past and present, and extend respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all nations of this land. For the program today, we're delighted to have Gary Dufour with us, who will formally introduce Ken Lum, who is presenting this year's lecture. Following his presentation, Ken has kindly agreed to answer your questions. And then Anthony de Jong, founding board member and immediate past president of the Duldig Studio, will conclude the program's marks. The annual Duldig Lecture on Sculpture was inaugurated in 1986 to commemorate the life and work of sculptor Karl Duldig and artist and inventor Slava Horowitz Duldig. And they're pictured here on the right in Vienna under the umbrella in 1935. We're very proud that this lecture continues to explore, present, and promote historical and contemporary developments, artists, ideas, and issues relating to the artistic practice and medium of sculpture. The House Museum is pictured here. It's the former home of Karl and Slava, and it hosts a nationally significant collection of Karl and Slava's drawings, prints, photographs, sculpture, together with the original furniture from Vienna. In all, it's a remarkable story of survival through art, and it continues to resonate with us today and inspire our creative journeys. I'd like to introduce contemporary and modern art specialist Gary Dufour, who will in turn introduce tonight's speaker. Gary has been an adjunct associate professor at the University of Western Australia's Design School in Perth since 2013. Prior to that, he served as Chief Curator and Deputy Director of the Art Gallery of Western Australia from 1995 to 2013, and as Senior Curator at the Vancouver Art Gallery from 1988 to 1995. Gary curated the Vancouver presentation of Ken Lum's first major survey exhibition organised by the Winnipeg Art Gallery and Wit de With Rotterdam in 1990. And when Canadian Commissioner of the 9th Biennale of Sydney, the Boundary Rider, 1992, presented Lum's furniture, sculpture and photographs from the artist's Portrait Attribute series at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Gary's recent publications include Jeff Wall, Catalogue Raisonné, 2005 to 2021, Howard Taylor's works from Kerry Stokes collection, Max Pam, The Contingency of Eye Contact, a memoir 1970 to 1975, and forthcoming publication, Howard Taylor Journal, 1946 to 2001. So please welcome Gary Dufour.
Thank you, Janine. Well, good morning, Ken, and welcome again to Australia. The chance to reconnect through the Duldig Studio is most appreciated. It's been a while, 29 years in fact. Ken Lum was teaching in Paris, and my family were on their way to Perth. So it was in Paris years ago that Ken and I actually had a last good catch up. So it's been great. On behalf of everyone with us today, thank you for your time, for your stimulating ideas, for your generosity, and for getting up so early to share them with us. When I began to think about Ken Lum, I took the usual first step common to any researcher and did what I suspect most of you have already done. Online, I scanned Ken's CV. I was struck by three things: its length, its breadth, the breadth of his ideas, and the geographical scope. Where haven't you been? What came to mind, though, was engagement. Engagement with people, with history, with community, with stories most often overlooked or perhaps previously silenced. And this may seem obvious, but I was also struck by how Lum's actions circle around biography, his lived experience, every action to some degree personal. Just how does someone amass a CV of 50 plus pages? When Ken was asked this question last year by the Canadian magazine Border Crossings, he responded, It's a bit like the Maoist line, every journey of 1,000 steps begins with the first. Ken Lum grew up in East Vancouver and is now Professor of Fine Arts at the Stuart Weitzman School of Design, University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. An artist, a teacher, a writer, a scholar, a professor, and a curator, Ken is foremost a change maker, someone who makes things happen and with the energy to get things done. He was recognized for this by Monument Lab this year with their Changemaker Award for his commitment to creating spaces where people and ideas can come together and together take actions. Engaging with people means meeting them halfway, or better still, more than halfway. Two quick stories about engaging audiences, both from a long time ago. The first simply serendipitous, seeing the joy on the face of a gallery security guard when he realized the text, a poem in Ken's painting, was in his first language, Urdu. This was in Vancouver in 1990, where Urdu is now spoken by more than 15% of the population. The other was Ken's commitment to planning for a future engagement. Ken told me in 1994 that he'd stopped reading newspapers in English and had started watching French TV and was reading only French publications. My immediate response was, why? Well, he'd been offered a visiting professorial appointment at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and he didn't want to be that foreign visitor, couldn't understand his students, nor them him. For more than the past 30 years, Ken Lum has been taking those first steps, responding to opportunities, going deep with his research to make sure that whatever the result, he could both understand the context and in turn be understood. In many of his endeavors, Lum repeatedly seeks out marginal or peripheral sites in the world of contemporary art. Early on, he was the director of an artist-run center, long before this category of activity attracted funding of any sort. And much more recently, as we all know, he co-founded Monument Lab. Again, this was an initiative at the community-based level, and now it attracts fundings from the likes of the Mellon Foundation, amongst numerous others. In the middle, somewhere around the 2000s, he took up the role of curator, first as advisor to Akwi and Weezer for the now landmark exhibition, The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa, 1945 to 1994. He followed that by co-curating the 7th Shajar Biennial in the United Arab Emirates, and more recently in 2015, he co-conceived and curated Monument Lab Creative Speculations for Philadelphia. List any one of these, and you have carved out a reputation in the world of art history. Together, they speak of his indefatigable energy, exceptional intellect, and an unrelenting work ethic. The core that links his artistic and scholarly output was characterized most effectively by his great friend, the late Akwi and Weezer, in 2011. And I quote, Ken Lum's work addresses the complex social questions of class, race, ethnicity, identity, ingenuity, migration, and difference in all its forms. Tonight, we are gathered to hear Ken speak about the challenges and responses guiding the conception and creation of public art today. The realm of public art in public places has changed dramatically in the last quarter century, and even more rapidly in the past decade. Questions once far from the forefront of one's mind are now paramount. Which publics? Monuments for whom? Of whom? Why? Are any spaces really public? Most civic spaces are now corporate entities, while others have become territorialized, zones where solidarity is enacted in public. Many monuments are now commonly understood to have passed their use-by date, whether that's the ubiquitous statues of Captain Cook across Australia, or closer to my home in WA, monuments to similar individuals long characterized as the state's founding fathers, Captain Sterling and John Forrest. We have definitely reached a where to from here moment, but how will inclusivity be enacted? Some clues can be found in how publics can react and engage through art, something that can be seen wherever you look across 4 decades of Ken Lum's astonishing oeuvre. Whether that's the disarming candor of Melly Shum Hates Her Job, which has been on a wall in Rotterdam since 1990. An artwork embraced by the people of Rotterdam from day one, so fully that a public outcry when Lum's solo exhibition ended saw it returned to what had become its wall, and then eventually the gallery renamed Kunstinstituut Melly. Or his monument to East Vancouver, monument to East Van in 2010, essentially a Roman cross, 17 meters high, that lights up at dusk. Based on an East Van graffiti symbol that Lum describes as being understood locally to have to do with social injustice, inequality, subjugation, and the trauma of poverty, acculturation, and migrant life. These are two works which resonate daily with their communities. The issues they unpack for viewers are issues people struggle with every day here in Australia. So thank you, Ken, again for getting up so early, for your insightful art, and I look forward to your inspiring words. Like me, everyone with us tonight looks forward to your talk. Public Art Now, Ken Lum.
Thank you very much, Gary. That was very kind of you and really wonderful to reacquaint with you after decades. Too long. So thanks for attending this event. I'm going to just start on my lecture right away because I think, and then we'll see how it goes in terms of the Q&A. Over the past decade, we have witnessed the rise of grassroots movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Occupy Wall Street, and campaigns to remove monuments. These protest movements have forcefully highlighted the effects of a social system rooted in racism, social injustice, and significant inequality. They also show the blindness of much public art to the complexity of social reality. Whether controversial to the public or not, public art has long become one more tool within the toolbox of urban planning implemented to manage urban pressures. Today, public art is ubiquitous and necessary for the well-being of the body politic. Despite this, public art is too often unquestioned as a public good. That's because we continue to hold on to the definition of art as beauty, art as eternality, and art is concerned primarily about truth. The COVID-19 pandemic has starkly exposed the extremeness of social injustice and unequal privilege. Because of this, our public spaces and governing institutions are undergoing urgent reevaluation. The concurrent crises have unequivocally underscored the impact of human activity on the environment. While the virus and associated stay-at-home orders decrease air pollution in many areas, human encroachment into natural habitats has indisputably facilitated the virus and its subsequent global spread. The current global situation challenges our optimism for the future, but it has also shown that humanity is interconnected. This interconnectedness extends to the natural world, encompassing everything from organic to inorganic elements that support life on Earth. We need to cultivate new ideas about coexistence and imagine a future where human connections are stronger. Envisioning a world with reduced waste and pollution is crucial for creating a safer and healthier environment and nurturing a closer relationship with nature. This endeavor must also involve envisioning public spaces designed for more democratic use and public art that fosters diverse interactions and discussions. So we are in a pivotal moment where the survival of life on Earth is at stake. And it is imperative to acknowledge and address human sins such as racism, sexism, historical oppression, and the degradation by humans of the environment. We are observing a transformation in public spaces as gathering places for people are diminishing, increasingly falling under the control of private or heavily regulated government interests. This challenge is compounded by heightened surveillance and monitoring. Recent events have underscored the political significance of public space and the impact of societal inequalities on essential workers. The theory of social practice asserts that space is a result of human actions, a concept championed by Henri Lefebvre in his 1974 book, The Production of Space. Lefebvre categorized space into lived, perceived, and conceived spaces. He vigorously argued that resistance commences with individuals' power to shape space, enabling them to assert control in their daily lives. Artists, I feel, are duty-bound to confront and challenge the dominant social system, as dominant societal ideologies invariably impact art production. Art plays a pivotal role as it has the capability to carve out a space that transcends a culture fixated on material accumulation and exchange value. The emergence of the internet and telecommunications technologies, including social media, has provided people with substantial opportunities to interact with the world in meaningful and innovative ways. Various information technologies have surfaced, enabling individuals to bridge the gap between their physical existence and virtual reality. Electronic communication offers the allure of transcending the physical world and cultivating a detached sense of self. But as a literary critic N. Catherine Hales has written, cyberspace represents a quantum leap forward into the technological construction of vision. Instead of an embodied consciousness looking through a window at a scene, consciousness moves through the screen to become the point of view, leaving behind the body as an unoccupied shell. Although Hales acknowledged the potential of new technological forms to create new ways of perceiving and being perceived, she also warned that information, like humanity, cannot exist apart from the embodiment that brings it into being as a material entity in the world. Embodiment is always instantiated, local, and specific. The purpose of art is to express changes in how things are represented and the unique specific ways individuals are shaped. The text is not just, Roland Barthes wrote about how written works operate, which also applies to art. Quote, the text is not just about good literature. It cannot be confined to a hierarchy, not even to simple genre divisions. On the contrary, what makes up the text is its disruptive power over old classifications. As public artists, we have a unique opportunity to act as a force for positive change. In response to the spatial disruption of our times, it's important for us to challenge the attempts by those in power to sanitize and sentimentalize specific heritages, as described by Doreen Massey. It's disheartening to see statues and monuments that glorify Confederate leaders and genocide perpetrators as examples of this sanitized heritage. Instead, public art should strive to reflect the genuine yearning for community felt by many. This yearning results from the fragmentation that affects our everyday experience of space and place. The many social upheavals have highlighted the need for art to address these societal shifts as people reconsider their interactions and connections with others. The late cultural critic Michel de Certeau is well known for his statement that space is practiced place. According to de Certeau, space is shaped by social activities, while place is defined by its geographic location. Space is impacted by the actions of those who use it, while place remains a static concept tied to physical geography. Places possess established meanings, while spaces can be interpreted until they are used. In this context, de Certeau highlighted the contrast between the abstract operations of urban planning and the embodied experience of walking through a city. Quote, to walk is to need a place. It is the indefinite process of being absent and searching for an appropriation. The moving about that the city multiplies and concentrates makes the city itself an immense social experience of lacking a place. This experience is, to be sure, broken up into countless tiny deportations, displacements, and walks, compensated for by the relationships and intersections of those exoduses that intertwine and create an urban fabric and placed under the sign of what ought to be. Ultimately, the place, but is only a name, the city, unquote. The potential of public art to revitalize the city and enhance public life is significant. It should aim to unite different neighborhoods and bridge the city's socio-economic and racial divides by engaging with other public art symbols and landmarks. In my presentation, I will discuss the challenges faced by public art and establish important principles for consideration. Instead of just listing these challenges, I aim to introduce a set of terms and ideas based on my experiences with public art. These terms, inspired by the concept of psychogeography by French philosopher Guy Debord, will create an informal map reflecting my experiences. They won't be an exact geographical map, but an elusive map representing the key inventory of terms. Personal experiences help us differentiate between imposed meanings and those we encounter directly. Ultimately, the value of public art lies in its visual and non-linguistic thought processes. In recent decades, the idea of art in public space has undergone a significant transformation. What used to be a source of controversy in contemporary art has evolved into a form driven by conceptual considerations. This challenges traditional notions of artistic representation, distribution, and spatial boundaries. This shift represents a departure from purely aesthetic concerns to an engagement with social issues, from a focus on art objects to a consideration of the specific site, and from static art to temporary or process-based events. Amid this evolution, we're faced with various societal challenges such as persistent global wealth inequality, the widespread influence of corporate culture on art, and the diminishing availability of public space and discourse due to privatization. These challenges prompt us to ask important questions about the role of art and its connection to the concept of publicness in contemporary society. Considering these challenges, it is essential for a public artist to rejuvenate public spaces by conceptualizing them as dynamic arenas that embrace a wide range of histories and voices. This vision is in line with Jürgen Habermas's concept of a genuine public sphere, where genuine public opinion can thrive. This necessitates a reconceptualization of public art not only as an aesthetic pursuit, but also as a driver for social engagement and inclusivity within the public realm. The topic of the importance of public art in shaping public opinion is something that truly captivates me, and I have delved into this often in my writings. It is heartening to see public art being increasingly utilized for civic bureaucracy or private development, overshadowing its potential to ignite meaningful conversations about social reality. Public art is often only valued for its artistic merit, neglecting its true impact on the public. These circumstances raise thought-provoking questions about the definition of public art and in whose interests it should cater to. Should public art primarily serve as a moral imperative for a thriving society, or should it be considered more as an economic matter involving the allocation of private development funds for public use? While there are arguments supporting the notion that public art enhances the economic value of a community, the emphasis on private property can lead to public art serving as more of as a private good than favoring specific communities. This challenges the idea of public art as an inclusive and democratic form of expression, as it often benefits select groups over others. It's clear that public space is not simply a natural order, but rather a product of power dynamics and often reflects struggles for territorial control. These circumstances restrict the ability of public art to serve as a more meaningful and imaginative social practice. Social inequality has made it evident that public spaces are not truly accessible to all, further worsening the prevalence of private spaces over public ones. As the pandemic revealed to us, people who own property can unwind in their own backyards or at their beach houses, while those without such opportunities have nowhere to retreat and may have to risk exposure in public spaces near others. Society is currently undergoing significant changes that are reshaping our connection with the world and to each other. This presents a prime opportunity to advocate for the concept of a global public good. Museums proactively update their names and at least notionally commit to establishing a more diverse advisory board. Controversial monuments are being respectfully transitioned, and people are actively advocating against systemic racism and police brutality to achieve greater social justice. Many ideas are surfacing to revitalize urban social spaces in the world today. The crisis has also brought forth new opportunities for public artists, provided they can envision and perceive the world in innovative ways. Public art, therefore, has the potential to act as a catalyst for the imagination, a pivotal social practice, and a platform to champion greater inclusivity. I understand the importance of these terms for artists pursuing or wishing to pursue public art. While my list of terms is not exhaustive, I hope it will help you. So now I'm going to just go into the various terms I think are really essential if you are interested in public art or you're a practitioner of public art. One, the term public art raises an essential question of what constitutes art created for public spaces. While many art exhibitions and displays are in public areas, not all are considered public art. This is because public art brings attention to defining the public, represented by the space where the artwork is sited. What public is being considered in the context of public art? The public is both a concept and a reality, encompassing diverse and complex perspectives, even within seemingly uniform spaces. As a result, artists need to approach the public as a concept that requires thoughtful and sensitive negotiation. Artists need to theoretically understand how art operates in a public context. Number two, you must consider space. Economic, political, and cultural influences shape the arrangement of urban space. It's important to understand that each space has unique rules and unspoken norms that guide behaviors and expressions, including the limits of what can and cannot be publicly said. Right now, what you're looking at is an image of Socato Park, which is in Lower Manhattan in New York City. And this is the basis of the Occupy Wall Street protests. The irony was that the protest actually began at a public park about a block further north. But because that public park prohibits people from occupying the park once it turned dark, they moved to this private park, which was only built because the developers were allowed to increase their development footage. And so, ironically, the private park, in which really started the Occupy Wall Street movement, was much more public than the public park was, and the public park was much more private than the private park was. Number three, social space. Space should not be seen as a static entity, but as a dynamic product and an essential means of production. Lefebvre proposed that all space is inherently social, forming a complex network of relationships and forms. And in that sense, all public art is in dialogue with all other public art within a city or within a geographical boundary. Social space encompasses both physical and conceptual socially constructed boundaries, constantly interacting with and overlapping other spaces. Human spatial practices leave behind both symbolic and practical imprints, which significantly influence the social structure of our environments. In pre-modern societies, space and place and community coincided. But in modern societies, increasingly, it tears space away from place. I'm just showing you Millennium Park here in Chicago. You can sort of see the cloud gate work by Anish Kapoor to the far left. And a lot of money was spent on this park, which was basically a cap over a lowered area, served as a parking lot for a long time. But it also is in a very central part of Chicago, and the city almost went bankrupt funding this park until private developers chipped in and private collectors chipped in. And so while the park itself is hugely successful, and that cannot be argued otherwise, it did serve to enhance property values all along its perimeter. And its location is right next to some of the most expensive condominiums and wealthy billionaire homes, which basically lined west side of this park. Number 4, site. A site is more than a specific location. It is a focal point for artistic experiences and the potential narratives of marginalized stories and voices, which are at the core of a site's sociality. So what I mean by that is that this site obviously originally was Native American site, and then it was a working class site. There were ethnic groups that had communities here that were displaced, and all of that history, it should prefigure in terms of one's thinking and consideration of a site. Here's the original parking lot. Number 5, history. The retelling of history is never singular. It is inherently multiple. It is crucial to analyze history and consider the intended audience critically. Both dominant and overlooked histories exist or coexist. Dominant histories are often fewer in number and may seek to suppress the many overlooked histories. Therefore, it is important to acknowledge and understand the overlooked social and public histories, both past and present. It is also essential to contemplate how subjugated histories continue to be marginalized. Number 6, stakeholders. Identifying the stakeholders and organizations involved in the proposal ensures the project's success. Additionally, evaluating potential conflicts of interest and determining the primary beneficiary or beneficiaries are key steps that contribute to the project's overall success. Here's a kind of interesting work by, I think he's a Canadian artist actually, Max Stryker, who filled this very narrow laneway in Boston with 2 balloon heads that were just pushed in there. And of course, it's kind of delightful work to see. Here's Rachel Whiteread's work for Judenplatz in Vienna, which is of a fictitious library that plausibly existed on this site. It was dedicated to Jewish literature and history. And of course, as in all her works, it's the invisible space, the negated space that is rendered material and positive. Okay. Captivating aesthetic experience. Public art programs are dedicated to preserving the rich tapestry of heritage and identity. While historical reconstruction often takes center stage, it is the unique telling of these stories that truly captivates. They should be presented in a way that captures an untold dimension or that which cannot be publicly said. So this is a group called Broken Pencil, and it's all made out of metal, and it's almost like graphite, but it's all these kind of short metal rods, and it's called a non-billboard. And it's very funny because you drive past this on a freeway in Washington State, I think, and then in the United States, and what you see is not a billboard, but you see a non-billboard. Number 8, non-art. In today's urban landscape, public art is vying for attention alongside a multitude of captivating non-artistic forms. So it's worth exploring what makes these non-artistic creations so effective at capturing attention, even if they rarely evoke the same level of purposeful intention and unease that art can achieve. Imagine public art transcending institutionalization to restore art's sacredness, connectedness to everyday spaces, time, experiences, and rituals. Viewing public art in this light introduces public movement as a pilgrimage, blending the sacred with the everyday. Public art becomes integrated into one's daily commute, imbuing a sense of sacredness in a truly public way. For this to be possible, the question must be asked repeatedly, what is public space? So that means that every time you engage in a process or a public art, you need to, at all points, never lose sight of the question of what is public space, what is my position relative to public space, what is the public space I wish to engender through my art. Number 10, at this juncture, consider a work of art as a transformative force within a specific environment. Public art is a fluid concept that defies strict definitions and engages with the unique spaces it inhabits. It is encountered and embraced within a particular moment and location, inevitably stirring collective emotions. Memory, number 11. Think of public art as a dynamic force that engages with memory and imagination. Memory is always in flux. It evolves and adapts over time. It serves as a link between past, present, and future. Connecting these temporal dimensions, remembering plays a key role in shaping our identity. So this is a work by Jochen Gertz for Saarbrücken in Saarland province in Germany. And what he did was, with his art class, he and his class clandestinely would come to this plaza of stone in front of the main civic hall in Saarbrücken, and at night they carved into the underside of each stone the date and the place geography of a Jewish cemetery that was eradicated during the Nazi regime in Second World War. And so it exists like that. And then it took about almost 3 years to complete. 2,146 stones have this engraving inside of it, demarcating all 2,146 cemetery sites that have been eradicated. And they told nobody. And then finally, the city was notified of this, and the city had some consternation about this, because it was not authorized. And but now they've come to terms with it and see it as a kind of invisible monument, which you step over without even realizing it. Number 12, consider the absence or non-existence of some aspects in a specific place or within a broader social context. This could involve contemplating transitional or counter monuments, manifesting as self-negating structures, such as a work like this. Reflecting on these omissions can prompt productive discussions about collective communities, individual identities, the interplay between presence and absence within the community, and our imagined contributions to that community. Number 13, reconnaissance. It's essential to take the time to familiarize yourself with the jury members and their views on art, which I had an image earlier. Look for opportunities where your perspective aligns with the jurors and use that alignment to bolster your case when presenting it. Number 14, public good. From its inception, public art has been viewed as a valuable tool for the community's benefit. However, there has always been a debate about what constitutes this public good and the specific type of art that best represents it. Whose interest should public art prioritize? Number 15, visualization. Please ensure that your submission provides a clear visual representation, eliminating any ambiguity regarding the content. Visualize the work at different times of the day and consider how meaning changes with varying light conditions. Visualization is the foundation for developing mental imaging skills and the cognitive practice of imagining a visual outcome for your idea. Be attentive to the appearance of the visualizations to ensure their effectiveness. I'm just showing you a work here, which is the Duke of Wellington statue in Glasgow, Scotland. And what's of note of this is that it's some prankster or even protester of the relationship of Scotland to England put a traffic cone on the head of the Duke of Wellington, and then it was removed by the city, and then someone else replaced it, and it was removed. And at some point, it became quite expensive for the city to always hire a cherry picker to remove the traffic cone. And the more the traffic cone was removed, the more it started evolving, so that the traffic cone also included the horse, multiple cones on the head. And then as the city insisted on removing the traffic cones, it started to spread to other statues in Glasgow, and it started to spread into other points in other cities throughout Scotland and even northern England. And so when you make public art, be open to the idea or that people are going to respond to it. And I think accommodating that responses should be configured in the way you think about your art. This is this is the same David Hume statue as before, but for many years, people responded to it by rubbing his big toe as a sign of good luck. But of course, the traffic cone would be a more negative gesture regarding David Hume. Examples. Understanding the history of public art is vital, and we can gain valuable insights from specific examples such as Cloudgate in Chicago, Louis Riel statue in Winnipeg, the Joe Louis Memorial in Detroit. Cloudgate, for example, has seen undeniable success by many measures. However, some question whether its high cost of $23 million, nearly 4 times the original budget of $6 million, was justified. Additionally, there are debates about the impact of Millennium Park, where Cloudgate is located, on property values and community welfare. Despite these controversies, Cloudgate has become a popular tourist attraction. The success of Cloudgate is a testament to the potential of public art to forge communities out of individuals. Its popularity owes much to its universality, literally, as the shape of Cloudgate approximates the shallow shape of the universe itself. Nevertheless, some argue that focusing on this iconic art world has diverted resources from other public programs and initiatives. So it's really important to not just know the examples, but study the consequence of these examples. Number 17, non-site. The term non-site was introduced by the artist Robert Smithson, to describe the interplay between the exhibition site and the geographical and material and historical context from which the artwork comes, referred to as the site. This concept explores the dynamic exchange of information between the site and the non-site, as well as the presence of multiple sites associated with any non-site. And a particular kind of non-site is what sociologists call a terrain vague, which literally means vague land in French. And terrain vagues are often discounted as works as land that is fallow, that is not in use and considered unproductive, and yet they serve as places of pleasure or places of congregation for people who are in marginalized communities. And I'm including homeless people, vagrant people, people who are drug addicted so that they can shoot up and so on. So I'm not always just, it's not just kids who can use it. Number 18, trope. Become acquainted with the artistic tropes and standard conventions in a specific genre or medium. This understanding can assist you in identifying recurring themes or motifs you may wish to avoid or depart from in your creative endeavor. For example, historical reproduction is a widely recognized trope in public art due to the predictable and conventional ways history is often depicted. Number 19, collective memory. The concept of collective memory is deeply rooted in how a society collectively perceives and comprehends a historical event. Public art is often a powerful tool to evoke and shape collective memory. What role does art play in preserving memory, and whose memory does it represent? How can art bring forgotten or suppressed memories into the wider cultural consciousness? It's worth noting that collective memory is subject to change over time and can be influenced by memory technologies, such as digital and virtual media and motion pictures. On number 21, Anthropocene. The concept of balance in nature has been revered since ancient times. However, artists must challenge this assumption because many development projects depict nature as always being in perfect balance and predictable. This perception is partly driven by the aesthetic appeal of orderly systems. While it's crucial to strive for balance and harmony between humans and the environment, we should not automatically assume that it naturally exists. Number 22, intangibles. Success in public art depends on various factors, including luck. The important thing is to anticipate unpredictable elements. While there are guidelines for public art, they are not set in stone. This list of terms provides insight into the extensive effort required for public art projects. With that said, I encourage you to explore the world of public art as I have shared some of the knowledge I have gained. I believe that public art has the incredible power to create a world where everyone can freely access its spaces. Public art can serve as a catalyst for re-examining not only our public spaces and governing institutions, but ourselves with respect to communities. So it's crucial for artists to lead cities in acknowledging and rectifying these shortcomings by embracing new designs and social practices that authentically represent as many members of our society as possible. I hope the ideas I've shared today resonate with you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for a very insightful and thoughtful view on public art. Now we have some time to ask some questions. While Ken's looking at your questions, just point out the link that's on the screen, which is to a free online publication that Ken has very generously made available to us. So copy that down and you can look at that at your leisure.
Yeah, so the question is, what do you think should happen to those monuments past the use by date? Well, it depends on the type of monument, right? For example, the issue of Confederate monuments in the United States, many of them were put up not during or immediately after the Civil War, but put up in the early part of the 20th century. In fact, as late as the 1940s, believe it or not. And some of those Confederate monuments that celebrate the so-called lost legacy of the Confederate cause, right, which doesn't acknowledge anything to do with slavery, were put up in states that were not even part of the Union, right, because they were put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy, which is a advocacy group to put up Confederate monuments in all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. And so those are fantasy sculptures that really have no, I think they can be readily taken down because that's just ideological propaganda. Slightly more problematic would be the ones that were erected like at Arlington National Cemetery immediately after the end of the Civil War. And those ones kind of remain, although those ones I do think requires a language and signage to elucidate how they came to be, why they are still there, even though I don't think they're really justified to be there. But I do think it's a learning occasion in those cases. So, and I also think the tricky thing about monuments is that they don't just, they're not just problematic because of their content. Of course, that's always an issue, but also because we as human beings become acculturated or become adapted and used to the presence of a monument in a particular site. So for example, you say you met your best friend for the first time by a Confederate monument, right? regardless of the problematic content, if that disappeared, then part of that memory of your meeting your friend, which has nothing to do with the Confederate monument, also disappears. And so it's not as cut and dry as, well, we remove something and somehow that disappears. It's because people's memories, I'm speaking about the personal memories, are always infused with the symbolic memories and symbolic expressions of these works. And that's why it's very complicated in terms of monument removal. How do you involve the public in public art? Who's in control? Well, of course, I think that there's too many, and this personally, I think there are too many rules in terms of who gets to choose the sites. Sites are often, for example, chosen by dictated by the development. I did the work that Gary mentioned, called Monument to East Vancouver, and that was unusual in the sense that it was up to the artist to find the site, right? The site would be, because in a city, the city actually owns literally, or has authority over literally thousands of sites, right? It could be from a tiny bit of land to empty acreage, and these are all potentially development sites that can be privatized, but they aren't yet. And I think if the city was to open up this idea of reversing the process whereby the site isn't determined a priori, but it was left to artists to negotiate with the city regarding their proposal, that would democratize public access to public art, to the process of public art. What delineates art from non-art? Well, that's complicated, because it's the question of nominalism, and non-art is how it's framed, not as art, and because it's a much more ecumenical definition of art today, unlike a few hundred years ago when depiction, its proximity to religious purpose, and so on, its setting within the language of mastery and sculptural technique and so on, and also validation through credentials such as going to an Academy of Fine Arts and so on. That's all changed nowadays. The good thing and the paradox of art is that pretty well anyone can participate in art if they want to, and anyone can declare themselves an artist interested in art. And that's a good thing that opens up the definition of art. That's not a bad thing, but that's a complicated thing, because not all art that's claimed as art is good or worthwhile. There's a lot of not so good art, a lot of banal art, right? And so at present, what delineates art from non-art it's wholly up to the framing and situating of the discursive language that you put around the work of art. That is, you designate it as art, and we have to consider it as art. Space and place. Well, someone just wrote in, space and place, could you revisit your differentiation of these for me to better understand? Sure. We normally think of place as this place where you have a concentration of all kinds of symbolic signifiers, and you go to that place because it's a gathering spot and so on. But what if you had a place that was, but it's also a geographical marker, meaning that if you have an obelisk, for example, at a certain park, and then you could say, well, that's the place of the obelisk. But let's just say that place where the obelisk is situated sees no visitors. Well, according to Dufour, that means that place is not producing space. What he means by that is that he's defining space coterminously with the idea of social space, meaning that a place is only important if it can produce space. Another synonym for space is social space, but also dialogic space. So that means that it's incumbent for artists to not just think about place as defined by the marker, as defined by the locale, geographic coordinates, but its potential to give rise to dialogue and even argument about all kinds of issues that affect individuals, communities, and present conditions. And so that's the distinction between space and place. Have you had any unintended reactions to your own public art? Well, Gary cited my work, Melody Shum Hates Her Job, which was only put up temporarily. It was intended originally to be put up temporarily outside on the side of the then named Witt de Wit Center for Contemporary Art, which is basically a Kunsthalle, a space of contemporary art, like a museum of contemporary art. And then when that work, and I never foresaw that people would embrace the work as they did. So I feel very lucky as an artist that happens, but it would have nothing to do with my intentions, right? And that's what I think an important lesson for public artists, that sometimes your intentions create all kinds of consequences which are wholly unanticipated. I've been lucky in the sense that I've had not just that work, but 2 or 3 works that I made that have been embraced by the public far in excess of what I could have imagined or hoped for. You hinted at the issues around public art that is erected in service to a dominant culture while overlooking the use of that space for a greater good. Do you also see it as problematic that artists selected to these public works, which often cost millions of dollars, are high profile and often part of it and further that dominant culture? And do you see it as problematic that many of these public artworks are shortlisted and selected because of the profile of the artist and a desire to have a piece by that artist, and not always on the strength of the proposed artwork? Am I concerned with that? I'm more concerned with the professionalization of public art processes. So I can see that there's a lot of pressure for developers and even art museums to always shortlist well-known artists in the art world. It shows their bona fides and so on. And of course, that often reduces the chances of a lesser known artist, or an artist that's maybe not as experienced in public art, or an artist that has even engendered some healthy controversy around their work, to submit a proposal. So that obviously is a concern. But I think what you are pointing to, it's more about the institutionalization of public art and how artists themselves professional are willing to submit themselves to the professionalization of public art. What I mean by that is that they see it as just an opportunity to make work, whether the site is interesting or not, right? And often I would say that many artists, they make work for a gallery space, an interior space, and they basically make the same work for public art without added supplementary reflection in terms of the specific site and context and history and the communities that are contiguous to that site. Can you comment on public art such as Christo and Jean-Claude? Christo was my teacher, by the way, in the early 80s in New York University. He was amazing. Who wrapped Little Bay in Sydney with silk covering over native habitats for a period of several weeks. Back in the 1960s, native bird habitat was not a consideration. Totally different now. I'm interested in the shift in attitude. Oh, yeah, I mean, that was also true for a lot of artists that would go out into nature, earthworks. I'm sure you may have heard about as a kind of genre of art during the conceptual art period in the mid 1970s, and they would go out into nature, into so-called untouched geographies where it was never untouched. There was lots of native people living there, and native history and animal history, and then they would dig holes and they would actually vandalize the land. And yeah, that was seen as like a great artistic gesture, but behind it was also the gesture of a privileged white man. There were almost always men doing that. If you compare it to women artists who were working in terms of the themes of nature and so on, it was actually starkly different. You would have artists like Agnes Denny grow a wheat field in an empty acre of land in Lower Manhattan, right? And that wheat, which grew within 6 weeks, was enough to feed hundreds of families. right? That's just one example, and that's not an exception. That was actually characteristic of a lot of women artists working in so-called land art. It was a very different approach. But sadly, if you go back to the literature of that time, the reviews were that, well, the women artists, they can't seem to get rid of the relationship of art to utility and function, and so they don't make the jump to speculative abstraction that the men can do. They're not given over to grand gestures. It was very kind of gendered, sexist language, and they were seeing women artists were seen as lesser, despite the fact that from today's perspective, they were in fact the opposite, prescient. Is there a distinction between public art and public memorials? Well, public art is a much broader field, whereas public memorials always have a mnemonic device. It's always about the signaling of history, of particular sets of memories, which the artist or whoever promotes it wishes to communicate to whatever audiences stands before the work. So that makes it quite different. Public art is much more wide. And there is a paradox there today, because public art is often seen as a benign term, precisely because it's so vast in terms of its iterations and variations. And because public art is actually quite inclusive. I don't mean not inclusive in terms of ideas of community, but inclusive in the sense that it includes and sucks in every type of form possible. And that makes it public art, right? But because of its inclusiveness in terms of the endless forms, that also makes it highly useful for private interests or individual interests to call their work public art as opposed to a public memorial. Public memorial, once you put in the word memorial, then it signals that, okay, it's a memorial that favors certain memories over other memories, and it's often seen as much more contentious. And so you have a lot of developments now that avoid the term memorial in favor of public art, even though ostensibly it is a memorial. Please describe the art we can see behind you in the background on the shelf. The pots and so on are done by my son, who's 13 years old. On the middle shelf, you sort of see, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Next, you can see a little bear, and then you can see a little man with a hand up like that and a hat. Those were done when I was 9 years old. So I kept some works from when I was 9 years old. Is the internet an online public space for art? Well, potentially, yes, but I don't think it has. The problem with the internet is that even though you have a mass of people who can respond to it, and this is true also for like social media sites such as Instagram, even though you have a mass of potential audience members, and that audience member is addressed collectively all at once, and there's potential for private messaging between all those members, it is not a work, it's not public in the sense that it addresses a community that's material and physical in one site, meaning that there is no consensus or aggregation of a singular experience of a site at a given time and space among more than one person or several people. And so in that sense, it actually underlines the community full of hyper individualized entities. And that makes it much less public, I would say, and much more problematic in terms of the question of whether it's public space for art. Can art be truly inclusive and for the better good for all? The answer is, I don't think art can be truly inclusive if you mean 100% of a community, because we all have society is too socially differentiated in terms of our experiences and so on. But can it be more inclusive? Yes. And do certain, for example, in terms of memorial, are there certain memories that haunt or that are more important to be commemorated or remembered, such as the trauma of 9/11 in New York City? Was that a large enough event of scope to be deserving of memorialization and memory and inclusivity even? And even if you were, God forbid, even if you were thought that was a good thing, you become part of that audience, you become part of that dialogue. And so it's not a question of whether art could be truly inclusive in terms of 100%, but it can be a lot more inclusive than it is. And it certainly, the other thing about public art is it often excludes the responses of too many people. We only seek the so-called ideal audience of people who are much more practiced at art, people who are much more literate about art language, people who are more educated, and so on. And everyone else is generally, not that they're purposefully ignored, but we don't seek out their opinions. And I think that's at the detriment of public art.
So all that remains now is to thank you for your presentation from me and for answering the questions. But I'd like to hand over now to Anthony de Jong, who will respond and draw a conclusion to your talk and also thank the relevant people. So Anthony de Jong is our a founding member of the Duldig Studio. He's the immediate past president, and he's our treasurer at the moment, and also the son of Eva de Jong, our founder, and the grandson of Carl and Slava. So Anthony, I'm going to pass over to you now for the conclusion.
Thank you, Janine. So firstly, a big thank you to Gary for his excellent introduction to this year's speaker. And the overview that you gave was excellent. It was really thorough, the way that you briefed us on Ken. The first thing that stood out in this extremely thought-provoking presentation and relevant was how contentious public art is in terms of its definition as topic. And it made me think back to perhaps some of my earliest memories in Melbourne, where we coined the term yellow peril in 1980 for Ron Robertson Swan's vault sculpture, which then became, internationally famous. And the controversy definitely drew attention to the city, to the artist, and to the sculpture, and eventually resulted in its removal to a new location and its continued existence and added to the story. And I think that term around the controversy and the audiences to which public art appeals and what in fact is a space and a place, and some of those questions just showed the level of insight and interest from the group today in the talk that you provided, Ken. We really want to acknowledge your vision and commitment to promote and raise awareness of public art and public spaces. And I do recommend everyone takes advantage of the website link to the online publication, so that you can also find out more and continue to look at how Ken has really interpreted and created a kind of language and a lexicon for us to understand public art. Some other little highlights for me: the concept of lived, perceived, and conceived space that you mentioned around Lefebvre, and the fact that naive Anthony thinks that public spaces are still gathering places, but in fact they're not. That to me was a really big insight. Some of those slides showing how all of the public spaces maybe have become non-public spaces opened my eyes on how do you even think about what is a public space in which public art is displayed. That in turn opened a whole new set of thoughts around the non-art in the non-site with the non-billboard, particularly like the non-billboard work that you displayed, and the whole concept of absence versus presence and visibility compared to invisibility. The example that you provided of the invisible monument, where all of those stones have been inscribed, but in fact no one can see that they've been inscribed because I don't think they've ever been turned over and made public, is really quite telling. So people are unknowingly acknowledging the art and its monument or memorial impact. I think that this year's lecture really opened our eyes around how much more thinking has to go into the topic of public art by councils, by audiences, by museums, by artists, and how to go about that kind of whole 360-degree interpretation, and the value of your lexicon. Hopefully the people here who've captured that can reflect that in their work going forward as well. So I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of everyone. We give you a round of applause. It's very hard to do on a Zoom webinar, but believe me, everyone is clapping. Ken and Gary, we all have our hands and our thumbs up, and we really want to acknowledge you for the work that you've done. The Duldig Lecture is now in its 38th year, and to our knowledge, it's the only annual lecture on sculpture in Australia. It's the 5th year that we've had the technology to enable us to deliver the lecture on sculpture online and reach audiences outside of Melbourne, regional Victoria, interstate and internationally. And we think this format and model really works for us. I want to thank the City of Stonnington, our local council, who have also done a fair bit in the public art and public events space. Their support helps to make events like this continue, and their support of the Duldig Lecture on Sculpture through their Arts and Culture grant that we received is a key component to us being able to continue to deliver it. Finally, I want to thank the team behind the scenes that you don't often see: our president, Janine Kibblewhite, Gina Panabianco, who played a central role here, Melinda Mockridge, Russell Smith, museum manager Kate Prinsley, former museum manager, and Bella Beeson, assistant programs and marketing. And finally, our founder and patron, Eve Leake, the story behind the studio to life. You can see the picture here of Carl in the studio back in 1968. Thank you, Eva, for all your work and continuing commitment to the success and future of the Duldig Studio. Finally, for everyone who's participated tonight, I hope that you continue to put your word in around public art and other activities.